After decades of new releases, the Resident Evil franchise has amassed a lengthy and intricate chronology, to the series' advantage, knowing it isn't necessary for playing any particular entry. The majority of Resident Evil games are intended to be unique adventures with a few nods to earlier installments to emphasize their shared world and cast of characters. Resident Evil 5 can be enjoyed as a corny, cooperative action horror romp even without prior knowledge of Chris Redfield and Albert Wesker's backstory. Because of this, there is currently a rare situation in which new Resident Evil games advance the plot of the series while remaking older games with little regard for plot inconsistencies. However, some fans have taken pleasure in keeping track of all the groups, viruses, and ancillary stories that have emerged over time. This is no easy task given that over 20 Resident Evil games have been released since the series' inception. But many people still attempt it. It's fascinating to watch the chaos spiral out of control, and you never know when something from one game will apply to another. Each subsequent numbered entry can be skipped by those who only want to play the series' most significant games, but the bigger games always seem to have a little more backstory. The classical period. Resident Evil 0 is still the series' very first game, despite the fact that most people wouldn't suggest it as a starting point for the series. Both Rebecca Chambers, Chris Redfield's partner in Resident Evil 1's campaign, and Billy Cohen, a prisoner who only appears in Resident Evil 0, are featured in it. There is lore to be learned from this entry, but because it directly precedes Resident Evil 1 and makes references to later games, newcomers may want to return to it once they've gotten their bearings. The franchise's proper beginning, which still holds up today, is the 2002 remake of Resident Evil 1. The Raccoon City incident from Resident Evil 2 and 3, Nemesis, can then be reached by the players after a few months. Resident Evil 3 begins days before Resident Evil 2, but ends only a short time after 2. This complicates their chronology. The Resident Evil Outbreak games, which emphasize multiplayer, are also set during this incident, and the Umbrella Chronicles remake of Resident Evil 0, 1, and 3 as light gun games furthers the confusion. It's best to keep playing the remakes in numbered order and to ignore the spin-offs because Resident Evil 3 effectively signals the end of this zombie outbreak. After Raccoon City is destroyed, a sequel called Resident Evil Survivor takes place, but it's also of no significance. Resident Evil Code Veronica, which features Claire Redfield from RE2 and Chris Redfield from RE1, is important to the plot. Code Veronica marks the end of the classic era and establishes several plot lines for upcoming games. The Age of Action. However, Chris' story will have to wait as Leon S. Kennedy from Resident Evil 2 makes a comeback in Resident Evil 4 as a government agent. Except for the addition of the Las Plagas parasite and Leon's return to the action, this game, which takes place 6 years after the Raccoon City incident, largely stands alone. Although Resident Evil: The Dark Side Chronicles was released 4 years after Resident Evil 4, it serves as both a retelling and an interquel that explains what Leon was up to between Resident Evil 2 and 4. It also appears to be designed to better introduce the antagonist Jack Crosser, who is the main antagonist in Resident Evil 4. Although the timeline is cluttered by all of these ancillary spin-offs that only slightly advance the plot, things become less complicated after this point. Resident Evil Revelations investigates what the main characters from the first game, Jill Valentine and Chris Redfield, are up to sometime after RE4. This storyline is continued in Resident Evil 5, which comes out 5 years after RE4, and the Albert Wesker arc, which started in Resident Evil 1. In Resident Evil Revelations 2, a few survivors, including Claire Redfield and fan favorite Barry Burton, go on their own adventure with a new Wesker family member. Resident Evil 6 brings Leon, Chris, and a host of other new and returning characters together for a global zombie shooting adventure as the series' final installment to wrap up this particular era. The modern era. Over the years, other spin-offs have been released, but they typically don't fit into the timeline. Examples include Resident Evil, Operation Raccoon City, Umbrella Corps, Resident Evil, Resistance, and Resident Evil Re-verse. Some games, including Resident Evil Gaiden and Resident Evil Survivor 2 Code Veronica, might even be said to ignore the main plot. Only the most recent 2 mainline Resident Evil games and their DLC are left. Resident Evil 7. Biohazard is a soft reboot for the series that introduces Ethan Winters, but it still shows Chris Redfield's growth and makes a hint about how anti-bioweapon measures have changed. The It's Not a Hero and End of Zoe 550 episodes tie up some unfinished business from the main game and prepare the way for the current installment of the franchise's conclusion. The game is very careful to remind the player that Resident Evil Village is the conclusion of Ethan Winters' narrative. It takes place about 3 years after RE7 and continues the setting's story while also revealing brand new information that reverberates throughout the entire series. Players can claim to have arrived at the most distant point in the Resident Evil timeline once they finish the Shadows of Rose 550 campaign, which takes place after the main game. Although there is a lot of variation in the plot and gameplay among the games, fans have remained loyal to this horror franchise despite its constant evolution because of the game's high quality and the added details that the remakes have been introducing. The PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC versions of Resident Evil 4 Remake are scheduled to go on sale on March 24, 2023. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe and support my channel.